In the video description, I'm going to provide a download link. So you'll be getting this. You'll be getting version 1.0. And if I update in the future, it's going to be the same link. This is entirely portable. In the previous video, I mentioned that there are two different versions for each game version. One was a 7-zip version, one was a VBScript version, where the VBScript doesn't require you to install anything, and the 7-zip version requires that you have 7-zip. But I've made it for the car switch patch as well as the track switch patch, that in the files I have a portable version of 7-zip, so you literally do not have to install anything, and your test drive 6 folder with this inside of it can be anywhere on any external hard drive or anything as long as permissions is allowed. So you don't need to really install it per se, but I'm going to show you how to set it up. But I call it install because that's technically what it is. But once you download it, you're going to see that there are 3 different versions here. Unlike my car switch app, which I'm going to talk about soon, I have an update for that too. And for that one, there are 2 versions. It works the same for both the US and the European versions. So I categorize that as one version and then the remastered. Every single version of the game, portable version of the game I should say, need to be considered separately for the track switcher. So the first step to install is to determine exactly which version you have. And if you don't have a supported version, get one. This folder contains the original disk files from 1999. Particularly just look at the dates and which most things are dated, not the 22, but look at the actual files here that's 1999. And also look at the size of the exe. It's 274 kilobytes. Now compare that with the US version, which is basically the same as the original disk that I have because I live in the US. Everything's dated 1999 pretty much, and the files are too. But the exe is 772 kilobytes. The app is going to work on this version, which is considered a portable version because I can run the game. I can run the game right now and it's going to work. But for the original disk, I try to run it. It might be missing some DLLs or something, but that's besides the point. The point is, for this app, I actually went and edited the code inside of the exe file itself in order to make this possible. And this exe is missing pretty much everything that I edited in order to make this possible. So, in short, if you have the original disk, this track switch app is not going to work. My car switch app should work. And I have 2 videos on that, which I'm going to provide in the video description, and I'm also going to use that in this video as well, because I'm going to be driving through the tracks just to show different things that are changed with the tracks as I go through this video. And I have a class 6 version which makes the car extra fast to speed things up. And I have a few updates with the car switch app also since my last video about it, so I'm going to show that too briefly. But the point is, this should work on the original disk. As long as the original disk, if you can install it on your desktop or anywhere where it's not protected with Windows permissions like C program files or C program files 86 and so forth. Neither of these apps are going to work in here or even in documents, at least for me. If you have the original disk and you want to get a copy of this, which is what I call the portable version of the original disk from the US, then you can download it from this link. This is where I got this version that will work on Windows 10. And then when you download the ISO version to your computer, just from Windows 10, at least this is how I can install it. You right click on here and you say mount. And then once you do, then you can install, set up. You just follow the prompts and install from here and that's it. But just make sure that you install it to your desktop. You can also download the Test Drive 6 Remastered, which is basically a modification of this application. So it is portable as well. And for this one, you don't have to mount the ISO or anything to get the game files, as you can see in the files here. All you would have to do is just go to this link right here on Google Drive to get it. So I've mentioned that the original disk won't work. The size of the exe is an indicator. It's 274 instead of 772. For the European version, it's 820. It's even more. This was a version that was released a little bit after the US version was. So whoever took the original disk and transformed it into this portable version, I am thanking them, and you should thank them too, whoever they are, for doing this, because it made this track switcher app possible. In the second part of this video, I'm going to show the entire process on how I did this, but I'm just going to keep this first part of the video, and I'm already going into too much detail to bore some people about how to use it and how it works, basically. But for the European version, I don't know of any download links, but if someone knows a download link, just provide in the comments below. But even though I have a copy of the European version files, I cannot legally provide a link to my knowledge. I don't want to get in trouble for distributing this as freeware. Yeah, it's crazy here. It says, you know, going for 50 bucks right now. I forgot how much I paid for this when it came out. I know it definitely wasn't that much. Alright, so I'm sorry about all that detail, but it has to be said. So let's suppose that you have the US portable version from that download link. So what you're going to do is once you have it, it's not going to be named this, whatever it's named, it's fine. But just make a copy of it. And after you download a track switch, just open it up and get the respective version, which is this one in this case. And you're going to copy all of these files into here. This one right here is just for creating a shortcut. I'll show how to do that in a little bit, but these two are the main ones. The reason why you want to create a shortcut is that you can pin it to your start menu. So it's important to identify the version that you have, and it's important to make a copy just in case. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just double click it to start it. Notice that it created a backup of the player data. Basically, every time you open this up, like right now if I go in there and there's just one folder that's named something weird, basically it's today's date and time with all of the punctuation taken out, and I took out the M for PM, so that if you were to open this up every second, it would create a new one with a different name. Let me close this out and open it back up and go back in here. Now there's two of them and so forth. So inside of each of these is just your player data files. It's a copy of them. And in this attachment, what I'm going to also provide is this. It's player data files of mine and also another moderator from Test Drive Speedrun. He plays the European version. So for those who are transferring from the PS version to this to try it out perhaps, and you don't want to race every tournament to unlock every car and track, this is player data for the European version. This is his. And this is for the remastered and US versions. It turns out that the player data files are compatible between the US and the remastered versions, and also the original disc too. They're all transferable. So if you have your original disc player data and you don't want to lose all that and start over, if you download the portable version of the US or the remastered, you can just literally copy and paste your player data and transfer all your money and all your cars into these two versions. But for those who are like me that may be interested in playing the European version because it seems to be a little bit better, like the background and some of the tracks looks better and so forth, then I couldn't transfer my data. I had to actually go and race all the tournaments to unlock everything again. But this acquaintance of mine from Discord, who like me is currently a moderator of Test Drive 6 Speedrun, has provided his player data. I thought I had a lot of money. He has 3 times the money I have. Absolutely amazing. But anyway, he was kind enough to provide his player data, so we have player data for every single version. No matter what version you have access to player data, that all tracks are unlocked, all cars are unlocked, and you have lots of money. So anyway, sorry to digress again, but that's what this is. And it's the game itself that will sometimes crash and your player data will get lost. And so what do? It might have already happened to you that you would want to use the player data files that I'm providing in the attachment. But so in here, what you need to do, if you were to, let's say, like substitute a track like Jordan into Paris and Cape Hatteras into New York, Switzerland into Rome, something like that, and let's say Paris into Hong Kong, Pelton Raceway into London, and let's say Pelton Raceway until itself. It should be self-explanatory why I did this in a few minutes. Now let's just go ahead and say change tracks. It's going to give you this message here. Basically, the files here don't contain the game files because I didn't want to get in trouble for distributing game files, number one. Number two, for the Track Switch app, it will be like 300 megabytes total with these files that you would have to download. That's not even the game itself. It's just patch files. So what I'll have it do is when you say, okay, I go to the install menu or you click install, well, it's going to tell you this, but it's going to, you see all the files that appeared? It's going to copy the files from the game, whatever you have, and create a directory for the patch itself so that the patch can work. Yes, let's compare. Yeah, 248 megabytes versus 12.3. Alright, so that's it though. So now, it didn't really, even though I clicked the change tracks button, It didn't really change the tracks, so I had to install first. So now you can change the tracks. Let me just run the original exe first. And let me make sure I disable all movies, and I'm going to also render to start in a window rather than full screen so that we can see what I'm doing. This is my player data. I'm Chris M. And let's go to Paris. In the car, all cars are unlocked. Try the Ford.
3, 2, 1, go!
Okay, so the car and everything is the same, right? Nothing new here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say change tracks. Just wait. It's going to tell you when it's done. I'm just going to expand this a little bit. It doesn't say that anything's in Pelton Raceway because I substituted Pelton Raceway into itself. But let's go ahead and take a look at the tracks now. It still shows the same track name, but when you go to it, it loads like this.
3, 2, 1, go!
Now I'm backing up because I want to show you that we didn't start where we're supposed to start. We start from over here, right? This is where we should have started. Right? From right here. But we started from over there. And now at this point, let me also put in the car switcher so that I can run through the tracks faster. I can keep this window open, but let me go ahead and get the US version for the car switch and put that in here too. And I'll do the same thing. What I'll do is just say install because you have to install. And so for those who have seen my previous 2 videos on this, I made improvements. It's all the improvements I think I could possibly make. So first of all, right now I'm racing with class 4, so let me scroll down to class 4. I have buttons now that it's going to check all of them as impact resistant. Impact resistance, for those who haven't seen the videos on it, is that when you hit cars, they're going to fly instead of you. So cop cars are going to go flying in the air, but you can maintain your speed just fine. And I'm going to make my opponents AI racers, except for me, I'm going to race with the G40, so I'm going to make myself a class 6 engine. So class 6 engine, for those who haven't seen those previous videos, basically means that if there was a class 6 in Test Drive 6, that the car's speed, acceleration, stability, etc. would mimic that class. It actually does. I made a tool to do that if you want to experiment with that. And the AI racer settings is for the AI to keep up with you and actually performs extremely well. It's challenging. Even though you have a class 6 engine, they can beat you on some tracks almost all the time. You have to be really good. And I'm saying without upgrades. With upgrades, you might be able to beat them, but it still can be hard. Not to digress too much, but for those who want a challenge, that the AI is very beatable from the original game, you can set your opponents to be AI racers and challenge yourself. Alright, so for the Ford T40, let me make it the Caterham 7, just for fun, and change the cars. Now for this one, it doesn't tell you when it's done, but as soon as that window disappears, it's done. The game actually crashed. I had to open it back up, so don't be alarmed. That's okay. This is not the exe we're going to be using. We're actually going to be using this. This was just created by the track switcher. So we're going to be using that one, but right now we're using the original because I want to show you a few things. So let me just race in Jordan again. As I showed before, we don't start where we're supposed to. But I want to show something else too. And you can take a look at the background. You notice that the plateaus are higher than they are normally. I guess whenever we get to see them again. But it's the same landscape. So that's a cool thing about this track switcher, that it allows us to see parts of the sky TGAs that we couldn't before. Okay. Oh man, what is this? So basically what the track switcher did regarding the original exe, it just renamed and moved files. That's all it did. But for this to work properly, the exe itself needs to be modified, and we're not looking at the modified exe right now, so therefore it's incomplete. So I'm going to X out of the original exe and go and load this one instead. This might come up on Windows 10, but it's not a virus threat, it's going to say that, but it's okay, it's safe. We're going to go here again, but notice that it says Jord instead of Paris like it did before. In the attachment, I have track list PNG. So in here, I show you all the 4-letter abbreviations that I have for all the tracks. I had to limit it to 4 characters or letters for each track name based on how the code is in the exe, and if I wanted to do this dynamically with a patch. Maybe there is a way to have the full name, but I don't know. And I also have the index number for those who are going to watch the second part of the video that it'll make sense. If I go to Pelton Raceway, it's going to say Pel. So even though I substituted Pelton Raceway until itself, it's still going to show the 4-letter abbreviation for Pelton Raceway because it technically did substitute it in. It did something. It didn't just skip it. And the reason why I have it like that is because let's say that I want to change London back. How do I do that without resetting everything? And if I don't want to reset everything, I just want to change London back. I just come here and I just say London, and then it's going to change it back. But anyway, now if I race here, I can complete a full lap, all the laps, but the point is I'm not going to be stopped anymore. Hear that road skid noise? You're going to be hearing that all the time if you play the US or the remastered version. For the European version, it doesn't do that much. So I'm going to have another button, as you can see to the right of the screen in the switch track app. I have the mute skid bird sounds button. So I'm going to show you what that means too. Let me go and race in Cape Hatteras. I'm going to have to race on a clear day so you can hear the seagull, in this case, chirp. This is something that doesn't really happen in the European version that much. This is an issue with the US, and you heard it once. Hear it again. Yeah, but it chirps too much that if you like want to race on these tracks over and over and over again, it's gonna really get annoying. And you heard the road skid as we did before, so I just click this button and it's going to mute those 2 sounds only. So all the bird sounds in all of the tracks, and also the road skid sound. So I have to go on clear weather again.
3, 2, 1, go!
So there will be no more chirping. And you should have heard a road skid, but you don't hear it anymore. This button is also available in the Car Switcher app, and these 2 apps don't conflict with each other in that regard, even though that they share that property. I have it so that with either one of them you can restore the sounds to the default just by clicking restore so it displays mute again. Let me show something fun real quick before I continue. If I go back to the original exe and I go to the beginning here, remember how I couldn't complete the track? There's other weird things that can happen even if you don't do all the work that you could achieve that result. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I set everything to defaults now, and I reopen the original exe and go to Paris, everything's back to normal, right? Okay, great. So from this point, I'm going to do something that I'm going to show in the second part of the video, but I want to show you the effects of it if you don't do everything correctly. Just for swapping files, that is. Not even editing the code in the exe file itself. So basically what I just did, which you didn't see, is I substituted in Paris into Newcastle. So I basically did this, but without the app. So let me go to Newcastle, which is 19, so it's way down there. Okay, here it is. So again, we didn't start where we're supposed to. I'm going to just fast forward to the end of the track now. Okay, now we're at the end of the track. Watch this. We're going through. Alright, so now what I'm going to try to do is just go around and I'm going to press the brake. Now look where I am. All of a sudden I landed somewhere. We're all at the beginning of the track again. So it was like a portal. Take a look at this. This is a weird modification of Paris. This is a result of what I just did. In a way it looks kind of cool but freaky at the same time. That was the Paris track itself that you saw. That was at Newcastle, because I didn't do something for the Paris track that I did for Newcastle that it would show normal, but we just had that magical power to go through the wall and then all of a sudden wind up at the beginning of the track, even though we were at the end of the track just moments before. But I just substituted in Pelton Raceway into Paris, but I did it in an incomplete way. That is going to show a similar thing to what you just saw. It's going to look even weirder. So I'm going to go to Paris. It's supposed to be Pelton Raceway. And you can race there, but it just looks pretty weird compared to normal Pelton Raceway. It kind of reminds me of the Upside Down from Stranger Things. And for those who watched the second part of the video to see how this can be done, if someone's interested in actually racing in tracks like this, change things up. But there's two things to mention about the drop-down list. Number one is if we go down to the circuit tracks, the drop-down list includes all of the single tracks and all 12 circuit tracks. But if we go to the single track slots, each of these drop-downs is considered a slot, and the car names that are in the drop-down are the cars that you can substitute in that slot. But for Paris and all of the single tracks, they're missing one or more of the single tracks, which means that you cannot substitute some single tracks into other single tracks. For Rome, you can't substitute any single track into Rome except for itself. And this has to do with just switching the game files. It has nothing to do with me modifying the code in the exe, for those who are wondering. And let me go and look at the code for the track switch. So in here, just while I'm mentioning it, is that if you do not like the 4-letter abbreviations, if you want to change them to something else, which I think most of them should be okay, but if you did want to change them to something else, it's really easy. All you would need to do is get Notepad++ or just any text editor and edit the HTA file, which I just did. I right-clicked on it and I said edit. And for Notepad++, what I'm going to do is put it in Visual Basic so that it's color-coded accordingly like that so we can see. And we go down to currently line 1096. And you can change them here. Just make sure that it's no more than 4 characters. So it can be less, like New York, for example, was only 2, and Hong Kong was only 2. But just at the forward track name itself, I'm saying, is no more than 4 characters. And if you make the letters lowercase that look funny in the game, you have to keep them all caps. But anyway, I need to go to the beginning. That's what I was trying to show. So on line 120, if you just remove those 2 from there and these 2 from here and you save it, and I'm not going to X out of this so I can undo that action to change it back. But now, if I go to track switch, I have the full drop-down list for even the single tracks now. So before I said I couldn't substitute anything into Rome except for itself. So let me just try to substitute Paris into Rome. Let's say change tracks. Just wait until it says it's done. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Rome, run it, game crashes, and there's nothing I can do about it. So let me close this, and whenever you make an edit, you have to close it first before you can see the changes that you made. You have to close and reopen it. But I'm going to comment this out to restore the drop-down menu that shows you only what you can do, that it won't crash the game. Okay, so now we're back to the way it was. And in the Paris here, I need to actually just set to defaults because we don't want the game to crash, or I can just change it to something else like maybe Rome in itself. So that was one thing I wanted to mention about the drop-down menus. The other thing is, you'll notice that there's no forward or backward mentioned here. That means that I can only substitute a track name with another track name, a location with another location. I cannot substitute Paris backward into New York forward, for example. So if I wanted to customize the tournaments such that I say, hey, I don't like New York forward, I want to change it to New York backward instead. You can't do that. So there's a limitation to how much you can customize, but only that much. So if you don't want to race in New York forward of Class 4's Tournament 1, then you can make it like Ireland forward instead, for example. But you cannot make it Ireland backward or New York backward and so forth. Just to keep matters simple, the folder levels in all caps, or in the remastered it's levels just with a capital L, is where the majority of the track information is. But basically, the B stands for the backward tracks, but there's only one models.dat. There's two of everything else pretty much, and there's only these. So I couldn't figure out a way, and I tried several things to try to switch them, even like just switch Paris forward with Paris backward, for example, and just chaos happened. The game didn't crash, but I saw all kinds of weird things, but not the desired result. Alright, so the last little bit that I need to mention for my casual viewers, not for those who are actually interested in how I made the app itself, there's one more thing you need to know, and that is if you want to compete on speedrun and you want to use this tool to be able to race with circuit tracks from the single race menu, where you can race with your upgraded car over and over as many times as you want without having to go to the tournament to race in the circuit track, that the super mod of speedrun wants everything to be exactly the same. That means don't change anything from the original game. For the mute birds and skid sounds, the road skid sound is really irrelevant because you won't be hearing that much because you can't race on speedrun with a class 6 car. So that won't matter. But the part that would matter is the bird sounds, that you would have to leave the bird sounds in. But if the bird sounds, if you're racing with the US or the remastered version where the bird is continuously chirping and drives you nuts, at least while you're practicing, you can disable it. And then when you think it's close to being final, you can re-enable them. Or, I mean, I'm a moderator on there myself, and I wouldn't mind not hearing the bird sounds at all. But if you're using the European version, you shouldn't have to do that. The bird sounds should be fine. You should never, if you're interested in speedrun, use the skid bird sounds button on here. But another thing is that, let's say that I substitute the original circuit tracks that I did and maybe one single track into Hong Kong like I did previously. Let me change the tracks. Okay. Let me go to the new exe so we can see things done correctly. So that would be here. If I were to go to Paris, which is Paris in Hong Kong, I'm just going to show this one part of it. But look at the cars, the traffic cars and the cop cars. They have the Hong Kong theme instead of the Paris theme. And this is something that's not acceptable on speedrun. You cannot have different themes for tracks that they weren't supposed to be from what they were from the original game. And this is the original game in every way if you do the correct substitutions. So basically what I'm trying to say is that you have to consider the traffic themes when you substitute one track into another. So if you substitute a track that doesn't have traffic to begin with into a track that has traffic by default, or a track that doesn't have traffic by default, you don't have to worry about it at all. But if you substitute one track that does have traffic into another track that does have traffic, then you'll have this problem if you don't do this correctly. And there was nothing I can do about this. All the blue have the same traffic theme. All of the dark gray have the same traffic theme. And I guess I could have Paris, Rome, and Hong Kong in their own colors because they each have a traffic theme also. They don't share any traffic themes with any of the tracks that are in white because the circuit tracks that are in white don't have any traffic. But this right here is actually something that I'm going to provide in the attachments. Right here, the recommended single track menu. So you can go ahead and read this. This is pretty much what I'm telling you now. But at the end of it, I have this, which basically tells you one way to create custom single race menus. So what you'll need to do is, like let's say you're using the US version. So you have that one, okay? you make a copy of it for the first of 3 additional test drive 6 folders. So you're going to make a copy of that one. And you can rename it to whatever you want, it doesn't matter. And you're going to do it one more time so that you have 4 different test drive 6 folders. So for the first folder, or the first single track set, I'm going to recommend that you put nothing in Paris. So in this case, I'm going to, if I wanted to just start from here, I would just put Paris in itself. You put Cape Hatteras in New York, so that's already there. Ireland there. Belton Raceway, and then England. That way, Cape Hatteras is in the New York track slot. They both share the same traffic, so that's what you want. The same for England and London. You can switch Maui and Cape Hatteras, or Maui and Lake Tahoe, or Cape Hatteras and Lake Tahoe if you want, or England and Newcastle. But the point is just keep it some way like this. And I have this particular recommendation just simply because these tracks here are the tracks where you can race the fastest. While Ireland, not so much per se. Maybe you can switch Italy, for example, with Ireland and put Ireland here if you want. But these are typically class 4 tracks. So if you're racing class 4 on speedrun, this collection of tracks to have in the single race menu might be good. So let me go ahead and just change the tracks. And I have the switch tracks exe or game open right now. When that happens and I want to switch tracks a second time and I already have this open, it's going to give you this message. So you really have to close the game before it can change the tracks. So I have to X out of it, now change the tracks, and it's going to work. Just wait for it to be finished. Alright, so let me go to the race menu and show that it's there in the single race. And I didn't show it before, but you know, all the backwards are substituted accordingly as they should be. So like Ireland backward, for example, is a track which you cannot race in the original game on any tournament with upgraded cars. So this is really an advantage. This is one of the main motivations I had for making this, because when I was talking about this in my last video with the car switcher, that you can now, because you can switch cars, you can technically race with an upgraded car from any class in any track. And I was wrong, because there was 3 tracks that you couldn't race: Ireland backward, Maui backward, and Switzerland backward. You couldn't race. You can check it for yourself on strategywiki.org regarding Test Drive 6 to see that all the tracks that you race with here, none of the tracks in any of the tournaments contain any of those 3 tracks. So this is perhaps the first time in history, if someone hasn't done a track switch app before, that you can actually race in those tracks. And for those who did watch that video and remember that I said I'm familiar with the track switch app, there was actually no track switch app before. The person who told me about the track switching before that I was telling you that about, is you see here we started where we weren't supposed to start. That was all that was done to switch the tracks. The tracks weren't actually fully switched properly. So this is the first time in history, to my knowledge, that you are able to race in the single race menu or even in tournaments with this track here, with Ireland backward, for example. Should you want to uninstall this app or the car switch app, all you have to do is click the defaults. And I have to, but let me show that before. I'm going to show something else too. There's a lot of things I know. Now if you have the remastered version, you'll have to continue watching. I have one extra thing to say about that. But notice that before I say defaults, this exe is here. But when I say set to defaults, it's going to delete it because it's no longer needed. It's going to be no longer applicable. So why keep it? And every time you run it, it's going to override the existing one if there is one. That's why we have to close the game before we can switch tracks again. So the second step to uninstall is to simply delete these files here. That's the application itself and the files. To create a shortcut to have this so you don't have to come in your Test Drive 6 folder and to run it manually like this, what you can do is create a shortcut that pins to your start menu. In order to create a shortcut that has an icon automatically for you, you just double click on this and then it creates it. So what you're going to do is you're going to right click on this to pin it to your start menu, because right now you can't pin it to your start menu when you right click on it. It won't work. But if you say properties and then you put this on the side, then you go to the track switch patch or the car switch patch readmes. Either one of them has the same information in it pretty much. But you copy everything here in quotes, including the space after the lowercase c at the end. So you copy that, and then you come here to target. You're going to arrow left or press the home key, whichever you prefer, that you go to the very beginning and Control V to paste it in and press enter. So from this point, when you right click, you can pin to the start menu or to the taskbar, whichever you prefer. But I'll just pin to the start. When you go there, now it's there. So now you can open it from there. And in the second video regarding my car switch app, I mentioned that, but when you run it from here, then just as in the previous video where I mentioned that this window is going to pop up, but now you can see that when I open it, the command window doesn't open up. And actually it does, it's here, but it's minimized, and when you X out of it, both the application that you see with the green image as well as that is going to disappear. So it works as intended and it's not annoying anymore. One other improvement I made is that if you scroll down and then you X out and you come back in, it's going to resume to wherever it was. It's not going to go back to the beginning. Or if you run any of these buttons here, it's not going to go back to the beginning. And this was the case for the car switch app. That's what I'm referring to for those who haven't seen the videos on that yet. So that's fixed also. Okay, so that is it for those who are not using the remastered version. For those who are, let me go ahead and just show you one thing. So let me make a copy of the remastered folder to play with that one. So for the remastered, there's going to be double of everything pretty much except for the track switch patch files. So you're going to copy all of this to the folder, and I'm not going to pin it to the start menu or anything. And the reason why we have double of everything is because there are two EXEs here. I mentioned in either the first or second or maybe both videos for the car switch app. Let me go to the car switch app for the remastered version so you can see the proper names for the cars and all, because the names are different. So I have two separate versions for the car switch app. Since the difference between the BMW and McLaren EXE and the TD6 EXE is that the Aston Martin V12 Vanquish is instead the BMW, well here it's the Aston Martin V12 Vanquish. I didn't want to make two separate car switch apps for the remastered version. If you want to use the car switch app for the remastered version, you must use the TD6 EXE. You cannot use the BMW and McLaren. However, for the track switch app, you can use both. But the problem is, if I switch tracks for the BMW and McLaren, let's say that, let me just do one track for simplicity, Cape Hatteras into Paris. I have to install first. When you install, you only have to do it once, which either one of these you run first that you need to switch the tracks, it's going to install. So when you go into the other one, you don't need to install anymore because they both share this track switch patch files and folders. So now let me change the tracks. Just wait. Okay, so now we see a switch tracks BMW and McLaren EXE. Okay, great. So if we go to it, it's going to say this as usual, but it's okay, it's safe. So Cape Hatteras swap with that perfectly fine, everything else is normal, right? Okay. But now if I go to the TD6 EXE, because there is no switch tracks TD6 EXE, right? So if I go to the TD6 and I come here, it's going to show it partially. It's not going to be fully done, and all that weird stuff that I showed before is going to happen. So in short, you have to do it for the TD6 EXE version as well. You don't have to change the tracks anymore. It's already set for you. All you have to do is click the change tracks button and just wait. So this is only for those who prefer to alternate between the BMW and McLaren or just the TD6 back and forth. Then you're going to have to do this process. When you switch tracks, or I call it change tracks here, you're going to have to do it for both of them. So now I have a switch tracks TD6 EXE. When I go into it, now it's there, right? Okay. And so naturally, you can potentially have two different shortcuts for each of these that you want to operate with. Then you can pin to your start menu as well. So now we're officially done with the first part of the video for those who want to see how I made this from scratch. And I'm going to show how I rename the files and switch files and things like that. But then I'm also going to show how I modified the code in the exe files itself and programmatically too, and talk about some of the code. Some of the parts that aren't obvious in it at least, so that for coders who are interested to try to replicate my work or at least understand the code. Regarding the code in the HTA file, that is, the car switch app has batch files, so part of it is programmed in DOS. The part where it actually switches the cars is in DOS. But I did almost all the code for the track switch just in the HTA file itself. The only exception is I have two tiny batch files here for zip and unzip. But that's it. Okay, so now we've entered the second part of the video. I have something extra on my screen here, which I'm going to use in a little bit. It's a portable hex editor. It is only 390 kilobytes, and you can move it wherever, make copies of it, and so forth, because it's portable. If you're interested in using it to follow along, this is the download link. And later on, I'll be using Notepad++, so if you want to get your copy of it, there's a portable version as well, so you don't have to install anything. So I'm going to look at the US version. So this section is about levels. What I'm first going to do is put the car switcher in here so that I can move through the tracks quickly like last time. I'm going to play with class 1, so I'm going to check all cars as impact resistant and AI racers. Except for me, I'll be the Audi and I'll make it F-150 Lightning. I'll say change cars, have to install, say OK, and wait. So now that it's installed, now I can change the cars. And I'm done. And I can mute the skid and bird sounds too while I'm at it. So I'm done with that. Let's go ahead and take a look. Let me first render this into a window and disable all movies. Just in case the exe crashes, I'm going to X out of it and open it back up so that those settings that I changed here are going to stay. Okay. Now I'm going to do some track switching with Paris. So I just want to show that now the car has been changed. All the cars that were racing with me. Okay. The map and everything is the same. Okay. I can leave the game open. I'm going to go to the levels folder. And let's say that I want to substitute, and I'm going to show every step there is in order to do this fully and properly. And it'll be the same for all other tracks. I will not be putting in the track switcher files into here. Let's say that I want to substitute Pelton Raceway into Paris Forward. So that means I want to substitute 10 and 20. You can now pull out that track list PNG that I have in the attachment to see that those are the indexes for these two forward tracks. So I'm going to extract the one that I want to move into the other one. And I can make a copy of the one that I'm going to move into just so that I have it. But anyway, this is Pelton Raceway Forward. What I have to do is all of these 10s, I need to change them to 0. So it's kind of confusing, but in the levels folder, the numbering convention is 3 digits, but in the level itself it's normal. So 0 is just 0, not 00 or 000. So there's 4 different 10s you have to change. And these files here, the .trf is actually something that you can use to affect the traffic. It can get rid of the traffic, not completely anyway. So I'm going to briefly digress, but first before I do, all you have to do from this point is just send to and then just name it level 000, the one that we want to substitute it into. You can remove the cross traffic in Paris and Rome and all of the single tracks just by renaming this to this and vice versa. Don't forget the capital L that goes with the B and the lowercase l that goes without the B. Once you do, I did it already for Paris.
3, 2, 1, go!
Basically what this does There's actually a way to do it manually, like manually adjust the code, but it's going to keep crashing the game. So I didn't want to just give you some random file with code modified from the normal traffic forward, but you said there was no traffic, that cross traffic right there, but I'm going to go fast forward to the part of the track where there is cross traffic. Basically, this is effectively shifting the traffic or offsetting the traffic. So when you do that, they're supposed to be coming out and with cross traffic in a certain point. So if you explore enough, perhaps you'll see that it's going to be cross traffic in random places on the track, but it won't be the sensible places where you can actually see an intersection for cross traffic. But that's what's going on. But anyway, I'll show the intersections. Like here's the first one. I didn't really go that far. Nothing's coming, right? But this is the main part right here. Nothing. Right? Again, nothing. And again, nothing. So I'm going to copy it, and you can have folders that are not named the original zip file names in here, and it's not going to crash the game or anything. So I'm going to leave it in. So now we go into Paris. It looks strange. It's supposed to be Pelton Raceway, and it looks like it for the most part, but it still looks weird. Kind of looks like the Stranger Things upside down. Okay. So the second step to make it look normal is the textures. That's what's missing. So this is Paris's textures. This is the original one, so I'm just going to rename it that. And I'm going to make a copy of Pelton Raceway. And notice here that there is no texture 5, for example. That means that this represents all of Pelton Raceway forward and backward. And it's the same for the levels too. That's another reason why I could not separate the forward and backward. It's kind of weird how the B's in here represents the backward track data, but the folder as a whole represents both. Anyway, all I have to do is rename this texture folder from 10, which was original Pelton Raceway, to 0 for Paris. So I go back to Paris. Now it looks normal. But we're starting from back here. We're actually like on first place. I was supposed to start from like right here or right here. I think it's right here for the forward track. It's where you think you should start. It's where the first marker is on the pavement. But we're not there. We didn't start there. So we have to fix that. So I'm going to do that now. That's going to involve editing the exe file itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go make a copy of the original exe, so we have the copy for safekeeping, and I'm going to copy this, even though you don't have to, into here. This is the hex editor, and when you open it up and you say file open, just search for the exe. Let's just edit the one that says TD6. And before I even do this, I'm going to just close it. What I'm going to do is use Notepad++. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, it's okay. You don't really need it for this step. But I'm going to open up this TD6 exe with Notepad++, and I'm going to search for Paris. So that's going to be capital level and then 00. It's according to the index track list. If I look at level 00, I see static 01. So basically, the way it is that level 00 through level 04, or in other words, Paris forward through London forward, all the forward single tracks are going to have a static XY in front of it in the exe file. Now just to briefly digress, in the original disk, if I go here and I say edit Notepad++ and I search for, if I just use the scroll of my mouse to arrow down, it's going to show the previous search query, and it's not there. It doesn't exist. It's not in English, at least, where you can identify it. So that's why I could not do this to the original disk. So anyway, so if I search for level 01, you can see to the left of it is static 02, level 02, which is Rome, this is Hong Kong, and then London. So interestingly enough, Hong Kong is static 00. And this KKK thing is actually, at least part of it, controls volume for game sounds. I kind of was experimenting with it and then changing it to see what would happen. And yeah, it like when I did it, it made the sounds really loud. I forgot what I did, but it's not knowledge worth spreading because it'll just give you a headache. But yeah, just this part here, interestingly enough, will affect volume. But anyway, if I go on to level 5, there is no static XY in front of it. And it's the same for the rest of them. So this is Paris backward. But to make a long story short, basically the trick is I need to copy from level 05 to the left of it a certain number of characters. And I cut that and I switch it with another, like let's say, let me go to level 00, which is Paris. I have a certain number of characters in front of Paris. I select that, I cut it, and then I go find, let me mark it with something, and then I go find level, and this is not the exact number of characters or anything, but this is just an example, level 10, which is Pelton Raceway. And I would paste it here, and then I would take Pelton Raceway and go find that wherever that X is, which I don't know where it is, and paste it there. That's basically what you're doing. So we've already swapped the level folders, but now we're going to have to do this. So I'm going to undo all changes, and let me go find level 00. There's only one instance of it in the entire exe. Oh, it's already here. But the problem is, because there's a static XY in front of the level XY, for level 00 through level 04, it's going to make it seem impossible to switch single tracks with other tracks or substitute tracks into single tracks, basically. Or in other words, make the single player menu customized and therefore tournaments. It really limits things. It turns out, to keep a long story short, all I have to do is just for visual purposes only, because the text here can be whatever you want. You can name it to something else, I believe, and it won't matter, won't affect the game. These are just slot holders, so to speak. But just for visual purposes, I'm going to take the static and cut it, and I'm going to paste it there and just basically switch them. So I'm going to do this for the rest of them. I'm not going to search for case sensitive so I can actually find it. So I'm just going to put an X so I know where it was to swap them. Okay, so now Rome. And then Hong Kong. And once you do this, you only have to do it once. So and that was London. That's the last one. So I'm going to save this and X out of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to call it base, so that we can refer to it later, because I'm going to modify the one that I just did even more. But just to show you that this does not mess with the exe at all, it's normal in every way, I'm just going to make sure that it disables all movies and it begins in a window. Okay. Go to Paris forward, looks the same, everything's fine. The game didn't crash, that's the main thing to pay attention to. Everything's okay. And those were the forward tracks. I just went through them because I didn't change any other the other track code strings, I guess we can call them, in the exe file. Okay. But I have to X out of it because we're editing the exe. So what I'm going to do from this point is I'm going to go to the hex editor just for visual purposes, and I'm going to open up the exe that I edited, and I'm going to click on this 5669, and now I'm going to search. You can't press Control F, it does something else. You have to literally click on search. So this one's kind of a little bit unuser friendly, that I have to, I don't know if you just saw that I had to uncheck hexadecimal, and I'm going to search for level 00. So the certain number of characters for this, to make a long story short, is from right before the backslash all the way until, in this case, that it looks like this. that's why I'm showing it in here in the hex editor, is that when you see a strip of nulls, and then in front of those strip of nulls, and it has to be several, not just one or two, there is a period, or I guess it's not a period, but it's a dot, like in math. In front of it, that is the pattern. Basically, it's the last non-null character before that strip of nulls, all the way through the number that's in the level. But it's not entirely like this, but almost always it is. For the European version, for Paris Forward, it would actually include the first null, but not for this one. It doesn't include that first null. Basically, the pattern is it has to be 147 characters total. What you see highlighted has to be 147 characters. That's the exact number, and it works for all of the EXEs, for all tracks. So that is the actual pattern. So how I figured that out was just experimentation. Huge headache, but that's all there is to it. But notice that static is here and level is here, but it wasn't originally like that. I had to switch them first in order to make it possible to switch single tracks. So that's all there is to it. So what I'm going to do is just to verify that it's 147 characters, I'm going to also open this up in Notepad++ to make sure that it is. So I'm going to edit it, but not edit it, just go C. I'm going to search for level 00. And in Notepad++, it shows you how many characters you're selecting basically. Down here in the bottom right cell, 182. So that's too much. We're going to go to 147. And you can see it is the D looking character before the first null in the strip of nulls. So that's correct. I'm going to leave Paris because I'm not going to go paste it in Pelton Raceway. I'm going to leave it here. So really what I need to do is I need to go search for level 10. But I'm going to replace the characters that were highlighted. That's the point. So for level 10, it should be this. It should be through the H before that strip of nulls, but I'm just going to make sure. Okay, so level 10 starts here. So let's see where it is. 147 for cell in the bottom right. It is right here, which is that H. Indeed. Alright, and this I'm not going to cut it. I'm going to copy it, because if you change the number of characters in the exe file, so if I would cut this and replace the highlighted text from Paris that I showed you previously with this, that's going to change the number of characters in the exe. We don't want to do that. So I'm just going to Control-C to copy it. And now I'm going to search for, and I have to uncheck hexadecimal level 00, which is here. So I'm going to highlight all of this and delete, I guess, and then Control-V to paste. Now save it. Now you can see that the TD6 exe has been edited. Just as an experiment, if you just remove one null character and you save it, you're going to get this, that the exe no longer has the icon. That signifies that you messed it up. So I'm going to press Control-Z to undo and save it. And now let's go take a look at Paris, which is now Pelton Raceway. Okay. Okay, so this is where we're supposed to start. You can see for yourself, just by looking at normal Pelton Raceway, that that's where we start. And I'm going to go and complete a lap. So we can notice that the lap does end where it's supposed to end. I'm going to slow down. There we go, it's right here. So you can verify that. But okay, that messy part is done. Well, for the most part, in order to switch any track successfully, even though that the forward track works, we also have to get the backward track. So I should have looked. But if we go to Paris backward, it doesn't start where it's supposed to. Right? This is clearly not where we're supposed to start. So I have to do that one also. But I have no more level files to switch. The level files is done. It handles both the forward and backward. As you see, right? That was already Pelton Raceway backward. It just didn't start in the correct place. Pelton Raceway backward is level 20. So I'm going to search for level 20. And it's up through this first empty set character, I guess. I'm just going to make sure. So I'm going to search for level 20. And we're going to look at cell until it's 147. Yeah, that's it. So what I'm going to do is copy this, say OK. Now I'm going to search for level, in this case 5, because that's Paris backward. So we copied Pelton Raceway backward. We're going to go search for Paris backward. That's here. And so for Paris backward, let me make sure that I have 147 characters, so level 05. And let's look for 147. It's up through that @ symbol. So I'm going to select this up through that @ symbol before the continuous nulls and press Ctrl V and save it. And that's all there is to it. As you can see, the exe still has the icon, so it'll work. Let's go ahead and open it up and verify that Paris backward is indeed Pelton Raceway backward. Yeah, we start at the second marker on the pavement. It's kind of strange. I thought you would start here, so for the longest time I was thinking that it was wrong. But then when I actually went and looked at Pelton Raceway backward, that's where you start. That's actually where you start, so it's correct. So that's the most sophisticated part of the process. We have to later edit the exe again for the track name, so that's going to be another sophisticated part. But I'm just going to take a break and do something easy. And I'm not going to use this hex editor anymore. This was basically to show the pattern. And actually, I have these images here that show you the pattern for the European version. So this was level 00 for that one. It actually includes that null. The pattern was kind of confusing there. When I was doing it for the USA version, then I wanted to go to the European version. That threw me off for a few hours. I didn't know it was 147 characters until the end. But that's what gave it away, is that when I was experimenting, I was like, why doesn't it work? That's what it was. And of course, with Paris 4, this is the most difficult one of all if you think about it. Because I had to switch static 01 with level 00, the first thing. And then the second thing was that it included null when the other one from the USA version didn't include that first null. So once I had all that figured out, this was the track code string that gave it away, that it was 147 characters from the XY after level. But I have all the images. Maybe I'll provide this. I don't know if y'all want, just let me know. Yeah, maybe I'll provide it in the video description, a link to download it. But separate from the patch files themselves. But anyway, yeah, this is all of them. Forward and backward tracks. Anyway, I don't have one like that for the US version or for the remastered. They're all different, but 147 characters is the key. Alright, so next I want to take care of the loading. So when I load this, I don't want it to show it flashed a Paris TGA. I want to flash the Pelton Raceway. So where's that at? These should be obvious. These should be easy. I gave it away by saying what it is. It's loading. So I'm going to extract all from the loading folder. And I can just take this and rename it to 10F because I want it to be 10. Just to keep it simple, I'm going to switch level 10 and 0. And there's no forward and backward. It's sort of like levels. It is just what it is. So I'm going to just now, since I switched them, I'm going to send to loading. I'm going to cut it and paste. When we go, we see the Pelton Raceway like we should. And not that it really matters, but if we go to Pelton Raceway, the loading is going to be correct. It's going to be Paris like it should be, but the track will be wrong. Wow, that looks weird. Okay, so now that the loading is done, we also need to change the weather. That will be objects. And in here, we have to do for the forward and backward tracks. But I'll just show for the forward just for simplicity, I guess. What I'm going to do as an experiment is level 15 is Lake Tahoe, so that's going to include snow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this folder, and I'm going to take level 0 and rename it to something else. I'm going to rename this to level 0 so that we can have snow in Paris, just to show you that it is indeed weather. Let's go to Paris forward. I'm gonna have to probably try several times before it snows. Okay, never mind, it's snowing. So I put Lake Tahoe weather into Paris, which is now Pelton Raceway. And that's all forward track, of course. So just to make sure that it doesn't snow in Jordan, we have to also pay attention to changing the weather or objects, and it simply just means renaming the folder, similar to how earlier we just renamed the texture folder. So I can make a copy of level 10 and delete this level 0 and rename it to level 0. Therefore, Paris forwards weather is now Pelton Raceway forwards weather. So next on our list is front end. So for those who aren't familiar with switching maps, it's basically this, the TGA that you see in the menu. And it's going to be whatever you do for one menu, it's going to do it for all of them. So the single race and tournaments, all of it's going to be changed. So we want to change that. We have to look at the code names for the tracks. They're different than they are for the normal tracks. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up track switch, just a copy of it without running it. And I'm going to change the language to Visual Basic, which I already have it in, because I had this already open actually. And here it is on line 1069. These are the track names. So I need to look for F1 track. That's Pelton Raceway because it's index 10. And Paris is just Paris. So I'm just going to copy F1 track to the clipboard to make things easy. Okay. So I'm going to call this Paris. So I'm going to press the home key and then cut it just to make things simple. And I'm going to call it F1 track to mark it like that. And I'm going to go find the regular F1 track and I'm going to rename it to Paris. And then remove that. And that should be it. So now the forward and backward TGA image in the menus should be changed for Pelton Raceway and Paris for forward and backward. So I have to send to, okay, so I'm gonna cut it and paste it in here and say okay, and that can stay, it won't matter, but okay, let's go ahead and run it again. There we go. So that's changed, and that should be Paris now because it says Pelton Raceway. Just let's go check the backwards real quick. Yep, and yep. Okay. And let me just go to Paris forward and race there briefly to show that the sky is actually correct. So if I just show you real quick what the sky is. You've never seen it before. I had to unzip the folder first before I can see the slideshow. But these are the different variations for Paris. You can see in the top left it's level 0. So it has just 4 different versions, A, B, C, and D. And we go to New York and so on. But it turns out that these do not need to be switched. That when you do everything else, the skies are not going to be thrown off, that they'll be correct. But in the code itself, I do have a function that I don't even use. I wrote it first and then I found out the hard way that you don't even need it, that the sky TGAs are going to stay the same, and that's this sub that starts on line 769 for those who are interested to see how I did it. Basic idea was to obviously swap level numbers with level numbers. The only unobvious part is that Paris has, and it's quite obvious if you look at it just a little bit, but Paris has 4 different skies, but New York only has 3. So what happens when you want to substitute New York's sky in for Paris's sky? Well, you can just choose to duplicate the first one for D, since I only have A through C and I need to have a D for New York. So I could just copy this and rename it level 1 D. So then from that point, then I would rename all of these level 0. And these I would have to remove them or just rename them to something else. But that's it basically. That's how I handled it in this sub. For those who are interested, but it's not used. It's there, and it takes up almost 100 lines of code. But anyway. Now let's load the exe. We go to the menus. Let's try to now change the names of the track. That's really the last thing we have to do visually for everybody, but there is one more thing we have to do, but it's a hidden thing, and it's something that has to be done programmatically, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So for right now, let's just try to change the names. So I have to X out of this because we're going to edit the exe file itself. This time I'm not going to use the hex editor. I can just search it myself with Notepad++. Let me search for all caps, and let me say it's case sensitive, Paris. Okay, so Paris backward comes up first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it Pell. It's going to be the short name for Pelton Raceway. But that means that I have to insert 2 extra characters to make up for that character difference between the track names. So in Notepad++, there's a character panel, which is why I don't need the hex editor to copy and paste the null characters. I can just use this. So that's why I'm just using this. It's easier to do things in here than there for this purpose anyway. So Paris, I'm going to rename it Pell. And I have to insert, let's say null. So 2 extra null characters after the name just so that I don't perhaps indent the track name. So that's why I'm inserting the nulls after, to keep the number of characters in this file the same so that it doesn't break the exe. And we can see that it is fine. Go to Paris. Well, in this case, it'll be Pell backwards, so that's correct. Okay, so let's do the remaining ones. So we have 3 more to do. We have to change Paris to Pell and insert 2 null characters after, and we also need to find Paris, and we also need to find Pelton Raceway. Pelton Raceway backward is here, so we need to rename it Paris. Even though there is room for me to literally spell out Paris, for some of the other tracks, the distance between track names is not enough that I could write the full name for every single track, and so I wanted to be consistent, but the maximum number of characters that I mentioned that we can have is 4. If I were to rename London like Cape Hatteras or Pelton Raceway, that's significantly longer than London, and I don't have but just 2 null characters to delete in order to make the text in this file have the same number of characters. But there could be a way to manipulate this, I just didn't know, so that's my reasoning behind it. Why I limited it to 4, because the shortest track name like Maui or Rome are 4 characters, so you can't go wrong there. You can always add nulls to make up for a difference in names, but you can't really add nulls for longer names. If we're going to replace all the tracks with Cape Hatteras, for example, which is a really long name, or Pelton Raceway, we're going to be having more characters in this exe file than what we started with. That's my reasoning behind it. Because we don't want to limit people to not being able to substitute every track with the same track. That's the extreme case. That would make this obvious. Alright, so for Pelton Raceway, if we look at cell, it's 14 versus just 4 characters, because we're going to substitute it with Paris. So I need to type in Paris in its place and type in 10 nulls. Yeah, alright, so I messed up. I had to come back. I forgot to insert the nulls for Pelton Raceway backwards, so I have to type in Paris. Pelton Raceway has 14 characters. So when I type in Paris, I need to have 10 additional nulls. Okay, so now for the forward track of Pelton Raceway, Paris, and then 10 nulls. Save it and make sure I didn't break the exe. It's okay, so let's go take a look at it. I'll go back to the beginning. So Pell is for Paris, that's correct. I mean, we don't see the TGA disappeared, but it is Pelton Raceway. So that's one step forward and backward at the same time. So Paris for Pelton Raceway, correct. Let's go to the backwards. Pell backward. Paris backward. Good. So mysteriously, you'll see that some TGAs are fine. Other ones are not, but clearly the text is indented, so to speak, in all of them too. It's kind of messed up. But that's how to change the names. Let's go ahead to the next step, which is to search for lowercase. And in this case, I'll show you in the code on line 1069 begins the abbreviated track name. So we're going to search for f1track.tga, for example. So this is another part of the exe. It may be unobvious, but what we have to do is we leave the TGA part of the code alone. But for the F1 track, which is Pelton Raceway, we're going to change it with Paris. So F1 track has 7 characters, Paris has 4. So we need to append 3 nulls to replace that. And you only have to do this once for forward and backward. So that takes care of the making Pelton Raceway's image into Paris's image properly. So I'm going to search for Paris, so I just have to scroll up and there it is. So Paris I'm going to replace with Pel. So I need to insert 2 nulls, save it, and make sure I did not break the exe, and I didn't. So let's go take a look at it. So Pel is correct. Everything now looks normal. For Pel, now our new Pelton Raceway, it's fully done. If we go to Paris now, it's not. What should be our Paris. And of course the Paris track, I didn't switch it fully for it to actually look realistic, but it's done as far as this is concerned. For the most part, we have to fix how it looks from the menu here. I'm just arrowing to the backward tracks. Pelton Raceway backward looks fine. But the TGA for Paris backward is wrong. It's not there, basically, right? But the names are correct. The names are not offset anymore. And so what I just did actually is for the names. So for the names not to be indented. That's what I did. That's what the fix is to literally substitute in here the name of the track that you named it. The 4-letter abbreviation name of the track in for the default track TGA name that's in front of that name .tga. So yeah, I mean, it took some time for me to figure this out. So all this does is just to indent the names. What's really strange is if you see line 1199. So this, which is kind of unobvious, but I'm going to show you how I figured it out. We need to undo what we did for Pelton Raceway or F1 track TGA. We need to undo that Paris substitution in front of it, because that index is in this list. We leave the one that was for Paris that we changed lowercase Paris to Pel. We keep that one because it's not in this list. 0 is not in this list. That's how it works. So back here, F1 track, I need to call this F1 track. I need to undo it. And I need to delete the 3 additional nulls that I inserted in to not break the exe. Let's check it. Okay, the exe is not broken. Let's go look. It should be completely done. Everything should look normal. All the TGAs for everything should be fine. Right? Good. So that's the full process of switching tracks properly. With this, the sky should be correct somehow, but that's how I know it is correct. I used that subroutine I showed you earlier to replace the sky, and it was off, and I really got to know what the skies look like to know for sure that it's correct, but you can verify, but it is correct somehow, because we did all these things. But just to show you how I figured this out, I was experimenting with this back and forth to kind of figure out what's going on. But then I noticed that in the exe file itself, the last track names end here, basically, that we substitute in the menu. But then all of a sudden, there is this list of names afterwards. So I don't know what it is. I just took a look. Carib SM, for example, is Caribbean. That has an index of 32, right? So now I'm just going to go back and forth. 32 is in this list, isn't it? That I have in my code. News M, that's Newcastle, actually. That has an index of 19. 19. Switz has 17. That's there. Cape Hatteras is 16. That's there. Tahoe is 15. That's there. F1 track is 10. Hong Kong has 3. New York has 1. And that's all of them. So I rigorously tested this after I even had it correct. I switched every single track to see if it was correct. So you can manually switch every track and see that my track switcher app is correct. It won't mess up the menu. But this is a second confirmation, I guess, this part of the exe code here. So it's kind of weird. So that's really the unobvious line in this entire thing. Let me show you two other unobvious places as well. And that's in the TG name replacements itself. That somehow, maybe it was my application with my chosen programming language or something I did wrong, because I'm kind of new to this. I'm not new to VB script per se, because I know VBA from Excel really well. But that's why I just decided to do most of this in VB, Visual Basic. But this line right here that's highlighted, when I was programmatically changing this from Paris to Pell with the nulls, somehow it was, for some of the substitutions that I was doing into the exe file, it was inserting extra nulls in the replacement. So in this, instead of Pell, it was like Pell null 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 for no reason. It was really weird. That's the only weird thing that went on that I had to kind of change. So that's what I'm doing here, is that if the replacement has any nulls in it, then replace it with nothing before you substitute that text in place of the default lowercase track name that's in front of the lowercase track name.tga. So that was one obvious thing, but something else is just how I handled calling batch files for zipping, and that is when I change the directory before I call the command line for the zip files. I changed the directory to the appropriate parent folder, but then I didn't change it back to the way it was before. And if you don't do this, then it's going to throw off the HTA file after that action is taken into account, because it's literally going to change the directory and it's going to stay changed. So you have to change it back. So that was the other unobvious thing for me when doing this. I guess the last unobvious thing is that New York has two TGAs. If you look in the TGA files for front end, it has York. It has SM York. It shows the same image as the New York .tga, but it turns out that you just need this one. You don't need the other one, which I index as 34, even though there's only 0 through 33. But it turns out I didn't need it, so that's why that's there, to eliminate confusion for those who are wanting to look at the code itself. And one final thing to mention that may be unobvious is that I have a sleep here, so you can go look at the JavaScript for a function to do that. That part I got online. So this means that you let it rest for 5 seconds. So basically what's going on is there's going to be a whole bunch of zipping of the front end and all those zip files, for example, and that takes time. After this point, we're going to copy the files that were zipped into the main test drive folder, but until they're all done, we shouldn't do anything. So we need to rest, and I just put it at 5 seconds. I think that might be good. Maybe for some computers that are slower, we might need to rest longer, but I don't think so. I think that's enough. I've never seen it where it was a really close call, but this allows this to be very quick in that way, because otherwise I would have to go in the zip file, I have it commented out, but I'd have to rest. Even 3 seconds sometimes is not enough for some of the larger zip files that we have to zip, and so you would have to have a pause between every single zip, and that makes it significantly slower, especially if you want to switch all tracks. But if you switch all tracks now, it's pretty much the same amount of time as if you want to switch one track. It's really quick, and so that's why I have Sleep 5000 there. But that's all I really have to say about this. If you want to look at the code itself, I guess you have to know VB script or learn it to understand the code in here for the track switcher. And in addition, if you want to look at the car switcher, learn DOS to see how it switches the cars with DOS, with batch files. But it was a learning experience for me. I mean, this whole thing, using JavaScript to create the user interface and also using it to write code. I knew how to write web page code with VBA code, or similarly VB script code. I just learned how to do it with JavaScript, and so that you can see the HTML is just that much. The body is just that much. So it dynamically creates the code. So the total number of lines is only 1357, which is actually less, because I mentioned earlier that, for example, this is the full drop down menu set that I have commented out, but that you can comment back in to see that if you try to substitute any single track into the Roam track slot except for Roam itself, it will crash the game. Well, that's in there. And also I have the Switch Sky TGA files, which is not needed, ironically, in the end. So that's in here. So it's not really a total of 1,357 lines. It's less. But it would have been a lot longer, and especially the car switch app, because there's 45 cars. It was close to 10,000 lines before I reduced it to what it is now. In the track switch files, I have this extemplate.txt, and that's really the exe just converted to a .txt, which I can show you right now. So this is the base that I saved from earlier. I recommend to use Notepad++ or something where you can replace null characters, because in order to, I'm going to transform it. So this is really the last step, so that it, and you will put this in the folder named switch track files, but I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to press Control H, and this is from Notepad++. It makes things a lot easier to do this. By default, it's going to be searched on normal, but you're going to put extended. And we're going to basically type in \XOO. That represents the null character. And there is just, I'm going to cut it real quick and type in comma, period, comma. This is what happened to work. That if I search for this, it's not in here at all. When I typed in period, comma, period, for some reason it didn't work. Even though that this is not in here, it didn't work. For some reason, I don't know why. But this worked, comma, period, comma. So I'm going to replace all the nulls with comma, period, comma in here. Okay, so now it's done. I'm just going to save it. And remember, base is when I exchange the level 00 with the static 01 that used to be in front of it. So that's all the changes I made. So that's all I did. And the exe is going to be broken, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is just convert it to .txt. And that's it. So this is going to go in the files folder, and then the code for the track switcher is going to manipulate it and then create an exe file out of it. It's going to convert this into the null character towards the very beginning of the function, actually. But that's just how I got it to work, because unfortunately another problem I encountered was if we go to edit just with Notepad, just plain old Notepad, and we want to save this, it's in ANSI, I guess that's how you pronounce this. Encoding. This encoding kind of ended towards the late 90s, but Test Drive 6 was programmed around that time, so it's still in that old encoding. It's not in UTF-8. So I did all kinds of conversions between UTF-8, UTF-16, different things to try to get VBScript to manipulate it without corrupting the file, and I couldn't. Like, I would lose the number of lines it originally was, and therefore throw off the whole thing and things like that. So simply put, you don't have to worry about any of that. All you have to do is what I showed here, is just to convert all the nulls to comma, period, comma with Notepad++ or something that's simple to change null characters in that way that I showed, and save it and change the file extension to .txt. That's it. Because null seems to be the only character that throws off the file system object. As you'll see in the subroutines in the HDA file system object is the software that I use to manipulate files in every way. I used it for everything. But even for the default VB script for manipulating files, the null characters would throw them off too. So that's how I did it. So thank you for watching, and have a nice day.